Taft's regret on the day he took the oath. The applause was loud, but his doubt was louder. Power had finally arrived, and he already wanted to give it back. Some victories feel like mistakes the moment they are won. To understand William Howard Taft's presidency, we must begin with a man who never truly wanted the office he achieved. Because leadership is not only tested by ambition, but by reluctance. And few presidents entered power with more hesitation than Taft. Most leaders who reach the highest office spend years pursuing it, shaping their identity around the goal, sacrificing lesser ambitions for the larger one. Taft did not. He arrived at the presidency not as a culmination of a lifelong drive, but as a result of loyalty, circumstance, and someone else's confidence in him. Taft was not built for spectacle. He was thoughtful, deliberate, and deeply legalistic. His passion was the law, not politics. His dream was a Supreme Court, not the White House. But history rarely rewards preference. It assigns roles based on circumstance, not desire. When Theodore Roosevelt handpicked Taft as a successor, it felt like honor. It was also a trap. Roosevelt's shadow loomed large. The presidency had been transformed into an engine of action, energy, and dominance. Taft inherited not just the office, but the expectations Roosevelt created. Those expectations were specific and unforgiving. The public had spent 8 years watching a president who seemed to treat the office as an expression of personal will. On Inauguration Day in 1909, Taft stood before the nation aware of the mismatch. He respected the Constitution more than momentum, process more than performance. Where Roosevelt pushed boundaries, Taft believed boundaries preserved legitimacy. Yet the office no longer rewarded caution. The crowd before him was not waiting for careful governance. Almost immediately, Taft felt the strain. Supporters wanted continuity of force. Critics waited for weakness. Roosevelt watched closely, certain his legacy required maintenance. Taft was surrounded by noise, yet internally isolated. He was expected to inhabit a version of the office that had been built by someone else, for someone else's temperament, and to inhabit it convincingly enough that no one would notice the difference. The performance was not in him. He knew it. He tried to govern as he believed was right. He trusted the courts. He followed procedure. He enforced laws evenly, even when it angered allies. But restraint in an era of expectation feels like retreat, and retreat invites judgment. What Taft understood as principled consistency, observers read as passivity. What he experienced as disciplined deference to process, the press described as absence of leadership. This was Taft's private regret. Not that he lacked power, but that power demanded a version of himself he could not become. The presidency was asking him to perform a role he did not believe in, and the distance between what the office required and what he could honestly offer grew not smaller with time, but wider. And from the very first day, he sensed the truth. The office he inherited was no longer the one he needed. That regret deepened as reality replaced ceremony. Taft quickly learned how unforgiving expectations had become. Where Roosevelt thrived on confrontation, Taft sought balance. He believed the presidency should operate through law, not impulse. He trusted institutions more than instincts, but the public had grown accustomed to drama. Restraint now felt like absence. There is a particular cruelty in being judged not for what you do, but for failing to do what someone else would have done differently and louder. Taft governed with competence that was real and results that were measurable, yet found himself consistently evaluated against a performance standard he had never agreed to meet. Early policy decisions exposed the divide. Taft pursued trust-busting aggressively, even more so than Roosevelt. But he did it quietly, through courts and statutes. There were no fiery speeches, no public crusades. Success came without spectacle and without credit. His administration initiated more antitrust suits in 4 years than Roosevelt had in nearly 8. The record was legitimate. The narrative around it never caught up, because narrative in the Roosevelt era had been shaped by volume, and Taft refused to match that volume, even when doing so might have protected his own reputation. Inside his own party, frustration grew. Progressives expected bold reform. Conservatives demanded predictability. Taft pleased neither. His refusal to choose sides made him appear indecisive. Even when he was acting deliberately, he occupied the principled center in an era when the center had become the most politically dangerous position available. Both flanks read his consistency as betrayal, because both had projected onto him the expectation that he would prioritize their agenda once in office. The deeper conflict emerged when Roosevelt returned to the spotlight. Dissatisfied with Taft's style, he criticized him openly. What had once been mentorship turned into rivalry. Taft felt betrayed, but responded with restraint. That restraint was interpreted as weakness. The friendship that had placed Taft in the White House was now fraying in public, and its deterioration became one of the defining narratives of his term, a story about personal failure that overshadowed the institutional accomplishments he had quietly assembled. Isolation returned. Cabinet disputes multiplied. Advisors pulled in opposing directions. Taft retreated further into legal reasoning, believing correctness would eventually win respect. Instead, it widened the gap between him and the public. He had staked his presidency on the idea that substance would speak for itself, that good governance would eventually be recognized as such. The political environment of his era was not built to reward that kind of patience. The presidency was no longer about what was done. It was about how it looked. Taft struggled with that truth. He believed governance was not performance. The nation disagreed. This was perhaps the most fundamental mismatch of all. Not a failure of policy, not a failure of character, but a failure fit between a man's deepest convictions about what leadership should be in the moment in which he was asked to lead. As criticism mounted, Taft began to question himself, not his competence, but his fit, whether the office had outgrown his temperament, whether success now required abandoning principle. He had entered the presidency believing integrity and effectiveness were compatible. The experience of the office was teaching him that in certain eras, under certain pressures, the two could pull in opposite directions, and that the public rarely waited patiently for the tension to resolve itself. The regret he felt on Inauguration Day had been justified. The presidency had become something he could not comfortably inhabit, and it was only tightening its grip. The resolution came quietly, far from the spotlight he never wanted. After leaving the White House, Taft finally stepped into the role that had always suited him, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. There he found clarity, structure, purpose. The applause faded, but the doubt disappeared. For the first time in years, power aligned with temperament. He served as Chief Justice for nearly a decade, and by most accounts those years represented the fullest expression of his capabilities. Years in which the qualities that had made him an awkward president made him an exceptional jurist. Looking back, Taft did not rewrite his presidency as a tragedy. He understood it as a mismatch. The office had evolved into something louder, faster, and more performative. He had not failed to adapt. He had refused to become someone else. That refusal cost him politically. It preserved something more durable, a coherence of character that the presidency had tried and failed to dissolve. His story matters because it exposes a modern tension we still live with. Leadership increasingly rewards confidence over competence, presence over patience, certainty over reflection. Taft showed what happens when principle collides with expectation. The collision is not always clean. It does not always produce a clear winner, but it does produce clarity about what a person values, about what they're willing to surrender, and about what they are not. The presidency did not break him. It revealed him, and in revealing him, it revealed something else, that not every capable leader belongs in every moment, that systems change faster than people, and that regret can sometimes be confirmation, not failure. The discomfort Taft felt on Inauguration Day was not weakness. It was accurate perception, a recognition that the fit was wrong, arriving before the evidence was fully visible. History softened its judgment slowly. Scholars re-examined his record, trust-busting successes, judicial restraint, institutional respect, quiet achievements overlooked in noisy times. Taft's presidency did not reshape the office. It resisted its drift, and resistance, in retrospect, is often indistinguishable from principle. In the end, Taft found peace not by reclaiming power, but by releasing it, by choosing contribution over applause, by accepting that leadership is not measured only by dominance, but by integrity under pressure. The Supreme Court gave him what the presidency never could, a context in which particular gifts were genuinely valued rather than perpetually measured against someone else's standard. Some presidents chase history. Others endure it. Taft endured. And in doing so, he left behind a different kind of lesson. Subscribe to join the journey. Taft's